If you've spent any time in the modern world, you know the sound of a mind running overtime. It is the persistent electronic hum of notifications, the frantic clatter of deadlines, the ceaseless whirring of the feed refreshing itself to reveal a life that is always better, always faster, and subtly inadequate compared to what just scrolled past. We have become creatures perpetually gripped by the pendulum swing between scarcity and overstimulation, this constant state of partial alarm, the knowledge that something could go wrong, or worse, that we are merely missing out on something better happening somewhere else, is the weight of what-ifs. It is a profound modern anxiety machine designed not to promote clarity, but merely to generate activity. We wake up already feeling behind. We leave the house carrying invisible backpacks filled with unarticulated worries about colleagues, finances, relationships, or global systems that operate far beyond our grasp. We mistake this internal friction for preparation. We confuse a highly developed hypothetical scenario, a detailed mental catalog of every possible failure point, with actual competence or wisdom. We genuinely believe that by exhausting ourselves in these what-if exercises, we are somehow preempting misfortune. Yet the irony is painfully simple. The anxiety itself is the misfortune. The worry does not keep us safe. It merely exhausts us into a state of perpetual, low-grade desperation. The ancient philosophers were haunted by different specters, the fear of fate, the capriciousness of gods, the unpredictability of human passion. But their struggle shared a central point with ours: how to govern the inner self when the outer world refuses coherence. They sought not immunity from trouble, but rather an internal sovereign space that remained untouched by external turbulence. The modern anxiety machine thrives on our willingness to outsource control. It demands that we worry about market trends, political outcomes across continents, or the fluctuating subjective value of human attention. We allow our thoughts to become elaborate narratives, complex dramas, where we are always either the victimized protagonist or the overburdened savior, and the fictional stakes, are always catastrophic. This relentless need to predict is fundamentally flawed. Prediction requires a stable system, but modern life is defined by its inherent instability. By dedicating our limited energy resources to constructing elaborate towers of possibility in our minds, we build nothing but exhaustion. Core philosophical shift that the Stoics offer is profoundly radical. That most of the things we spend our deepest mental efforts worrying about are not merely uncontrollable. They are simply outside the domain of human agency. The anxiety machine excels because it has successfully blurred this boundary for us. It makes the global economy feel like a matter of personal accountability, and emotional validation feel dependent upon external metrics. Consider the physical act of worry itself. When you replay a stressful conversation in your head late at night, analyzing every inflection and word choice, you are doing deep work on something that is over. You are re-experiencing an event from a position of perfect safety, stripping it of its original context, risk, and immediate consequence. This careful psychological dissection serves no constructive purpose. It only magnifies the perceived weight of the interaction. It transforms a fleeting moment into a permanent flaw in your personal narrative. The task, therefore, is to treat anxiety not as a helpful internal alarm system, as many people convince themselves, but as what it truly is, an unnecessary expenditure of vital mental capital. When we feel that familiar clench in the chest, that urgent need to research, plan, or correct something intangible, we must pause. We must perform a momentary audit. A radical self-intervention requires us simply to draw a line, a conceptual demarcation between what is subject to our will and judgment and everything else. The rain hitting the window pane, that is external. The politician's decision-making dinner, that is external. Whether we receive the desired promotion or whether that beloved system ultimately collapses, those are elements of fortune, beyond our direct command. The only things remaining firmly within the citadel of self-sovereignty are your judgments. They are the immediate assent you give to an impression. Is it the event itself that is terrible, or is it your story about the event? This distinction is not mere academic philosophy. It is a survival tool. It is the quiet realization that until we interrupt the automatic flow of what if our lives become merely scripted anxieties of hypothetical catastrophe. The great work, then, is learning to inhabit a thoughtful boredom, a spaciousness in the mind that can withstand the onslaught of predictive worry. It means accepting the simple fact of being present. It means acknowledging that life rarely unfolds with the neat predictability we crave, and that seeking perfect control over an imperfect universe is the single greatest source of human misery. This chapter does not promise to eliminate worry entirely. It promises only something far more profound: the ability to recognize the lie inherent in what if, and thus reclaiming the precious energy required for the difficult, beautiful act of simply being. In the previous chapters, we were introduced to a pervasive, low-frequency hum of modern anxiety, the constant internal soundtrack of what if. We learned that this noise is rarely preparation. It is merely exhaustion in a mental form. The fundamental challenge, then, was simple but terrifying: learning where the edge of yourself ends and the boundless chaos begins. That boundary, that demarcation line between what you can influence and what exists purely beyond your grasp, is the great work of Stoicism. This boundary is not merely an intellectual concept to be grasped in a lecture hall. It must become a physical reality, a conscious architecture built around the self. The Stoics gave us the metaphor of the citadel, the internal fortress. Imagine it, a place unassailable by external forces. Nothing can batter down your core beliefs or your judgments. Only you hold the keys to that inner peace. Our teacher Epictetus, whose wisdom was forged in chains and profound hardship, did not give us vague platitudes about staying calm. He gave us a ruthless division of labor for the mind. We must differentiate ruthlessly between things that are truly ours, our judgments, our impulses to assent or dissent, and our capacity for response, and everything else, Other people's opinions, market fluctuations, the unpredictable whims of fate, even our own bodies in decline. This is the core act of self-sovereignty. It sounds dramatic, almost radical, because it demands that we relinquish ownership over nearly everything we have ever secretly assumed was ours to control. When we try to manage other people's feelings or force a massive corporate initiative to behave exactly as planned, we find ourselves in a constant state of psychic warfare, always fighting battles that were never meant for us. The chaos surrounding us, the shifting economic tides, the political upheaval, the sheer speed of modern life will continue its relentless rush. It will attempt to spill over that inner boundary like sewage from an overflowing drain. It will whisper anxieties about insufficient savings, lost opportunities, and social judgment. The crucial moment is when the external pressure reaches maximum force and you are forced to pause. You must perform a rapid mental audit. Is this something I can truly own? Can I guard it with my will? If the answer points outside the citadel, if the issue lies in a policy change, another person's heart, or the weather forecast, then the only acceptable response is detachment. Not apathy, which suggests indifference due to lack of feeling, but reasoned non-attachment. It is acknowledging reality for what it is, transient, indifferent, and uncontrollable. We must learn to treat external events not as personal affronts or insurmountable tests, but simply as data points on the stream of existence. They happened. End of story. Our only variable, our single point of leverage, is the filter we apply through which they pass into consciousness. If we allow the event to dictate the filter, we are enslaved. But if we consciously choose the filter, if we decide that this outcome, however disappointing, will not define my worth or derail my internal peace, then we reclaim our freedom. The work of building this inner citadel is never completed. It requires constant maintenance. It means practicing a profound skepticism regarding what must be true. When something goes wrong, the emotional spiral kicks in immediately. I must fix this. This is terrible. This proves my failure. The Stoic discipline demands that we stop at the word terrible. We pause and ask instead, what actual evidence do I have that it is truly insurmountable? Am I conflating a setback with an inherent flaw in character? Or am I mistaking a temporary inconvenience for eternal misfortune? The luxury of life, ironically, is this capacity to observe one's own judgments, to watch the narrative unfold in your mind and say, ah, there is that judgment again. You are interpreting disappointment as catastrophe. This discipline gives us tremendous emotional space. By recognizing our internal judgments as mere opinions, potent, but ultimately fragile thoughts, we disarm their power. We stop reacting to external stimuli and start choosing the response. The physical manifestation of this control is often found in stillness, in standing alone with nothing around you but your own breath. Your mind finally gets a chance to breathe away from the cacophony of perceived obligations. It allows you to hear the quiet authority within. You are whole enough right now. You do not need external validation to prove your value. The boundary we draw is therefore a compassionate one, a kindness shown to the exhausted self. We stop demanding perfection from ourselves and start acknowledging that our agency lies only in the quality of our intent and the virtue displayed when everything around us threatens to scatter into disorder. True power is not wielding influence over others. It is perfecting the relationship between you and your own mind. We have spent time establishing the boundaries of the self, the internal citadel, where only your judgments reside. But modern life has a remarkable knack for finding the seams in even the most fortified mind, pulling us back into the relentless current of external desire. We are told implicitly and explicitly that fulfillment is transactional, that if we just acquire enough status, or accelerate our income, or curate enough perfect experiences, the underlying hum of anxiety will finally quiet down. This powerful myth that wanting more leads to happiness is perhaps the most enduring psychological trap of our species. The ancient philosophers looked at this ceaseless hunger and saw not a biological necessity, but a form of magnificent self-delusion. The pursuit of desire, we learn from the Stoics, is often less about gaining something beautiful than it is about fleeing the discomfort of what we already have to confront. We confuse aspiration with actual contentment. Consider the subtle tyranny inherent in our modern concept of progress. It whispers that if you are not climbing, you are falling. That if your life does not demonstrably improve every quarter, then something fundamental must be wrong. This relentless motion becomes its own goal, distracting us from the simple act of simply being. We mistake the accumulation of achievements for the growth of character. When we build our self-worth upon external scaffolding, on job titles, on follower counts, on perfectly polished possessions, we are building ourselves into a perpetual state of indebtedness to things that can fail or fade. The sheer weight of desire is ironically exhausting. It demands constant maintenance. It requires comparing the imperfect reality you inhabit right now with an idealized, hyper-curated projection of someone else's perfect life, a life which, by definition, must be incomplete and artificial. And this comparison, fueled by relentless digital feeds, guarantees a perpetual state of inadequacy. We become connoisseurs of longing. Stoicism offers us a radical pivot in understanding this hunger. It challenges the notion that desire itself is inherently bad. Raw emotion, deep passion, even ambition, these are merely energies. The trouble begins when we attach our fundamental sense of self-worth to the outcome of those energies. When your happiness becomes contingent upon another person's approval, or a market's favor, or the successful completion of a highly complex schedule, you have given away your sovereign ground. The true mastery, therefore, is not learning how to want grander things, but realizing the liberating power of non-wanting, those particular external outcomes. It is a profound indifference to what happens next, not cold apathy in the dramatic sense, but rather a balanced wisdom that acknowledges the inevitable flow and impermanence of all striving. This detachment does not mean settling for mediocrity. It means setting your highest value at something internal, on your character, your judgment, your ability to remain ethical regardless of circumstance. The trick is recognizing when desire shifts from being an engine of positive action, the desire to master a craft, the ambition to help a community, into merely a desperate mechanism for filling a vacuum. When you begin chasing desires just because they are advertised as better or more profitable, or simply because your peers have achieved them first, you are no longer moving toward a defined self. You are being towed by the consensus of cultural expectation. The greatest poverty, according to this ancient view, is not material lack. It is the spiritual impoverishment of having one's internal peace dictated by external whims. The constant chasing leaves us perpetually running on an emotional hamster wheel, always needing more dopamine, more validation, more novelty, and thus never truly arriving anywhere. This realization demands a cognitive shift that feels deeply counterintuitive in our hyper-capitalist moment. We are culturally rewarded for escalation, more effort, faster results, bigger reach. Yet, the philosophy whispers a quiet revolution. True strength is found in moderation of expectation. It is in realizing that a genuinely good life does not require dramatic victories or infinite accumulation, but rather a sustainable equilibrium with what already is asterisk. To counter this tyranny of desire, we must practice defining an enough. Not merely enough money to survive, but enough self-acceptance to allow you to live meaningfully without the crushing pressure of constantly optimizing your existence for some future, perfect version of yourself. This concept of finding sufficiency within your current parameters is not a retreat from ambition. It is its most solid foundation. It is recognizing that genuine power resides in being content with what can be controlled, the integrity of your present moment judgment. Only when you let go of the frantic need to control the destination does the journey itself begin to feel like enough. We have spent time drawing boundaries, establishing the internal citadel. We learn to distinguish between what is within our reasoned control, our judgments, our assent, and the sprawling, indifferent chaos of everything else. The next step, therefore, must be to truly understand the nature of emotional response itself. For too often, we conflate feeling with fact. We treat an external event as proof that something deep inside us is broken. We are not aiming for numbness. That would be a kind of spiritual paralysis, a refusal to care that leaves one unprepared for the necessary demands of life. To mistake emotional reaction for genuine connection, or reasoned response for cold detachment, is a common and persistent error. The aim, instead, is something far more sophisticated. It is equilibrium. It is standing in the tempest not because you are immune to the rain, but because your foundation is strong enough that the wind cannot uproot you. This is the concept of apatheia, a word often mistranslated and tragically misunderstood by modern ears. We hear apathetic and imagine a vacuum where feeling used to be, an empty shell devoid of passion or concern. But for the Stoics, particularly when discussing the reasoned state of man, apatheia is not merely indifference. It is freedom from pathological passions, the destructive loops of fear, overwhelming desire, excessive grief, and irrational anger. Think instead of it as mastering your internal weather system. You are not blocked from experiencing joy or appropriate sorrow. You simply refuse to let the external circumstance dictate the intensity or duration of that emotion. It is the difference between being swept away by a tidal wave and observing the tide's rhythmic, inevitable withdrawal. Consider how easily we are hijacked. A minor slight at work becomes proof of fundamental injustice in our lives. A change in market conditions feels like a personal failing, as if your worth depends entirely on metrics outside your immediate influence. These are not objective facts. They are emotional judgments dressed up as unavoidable reality. The passionate mind accepts these initial judgments. This is intolerable. I cannot bear this loss, or even the more insidious ones. If I had only, and the floodgates open. The mastery of Apatheia begins by pausing at the precise moment of assault. When the trigger fires, the harsh criticism, the sudden failure, the missed opportunity, your first instinct is pure reaction, to defend, to lash out, or to withdraw entirely into self-pity. The Stoic pause demands something harder than mere breath control. It requires cognitive intervention. It is a moment where you step back from the drama and observe it as if it were happening in a play directed by someone else. This observation allows you to apply the crucial philosophical filter. Is this thing truly bad, or is my interpretation of it that makes it so? The event itself holds no moral weight. Only your voluntary assent to its severity does. This distinction is radical and utterly liberating. It pulls the entire center of gravity back inside, protecting the sacred ground of your judgment. The key misunderstanding we must correct is that detachment is passive resignation. True emotional mastery is profoundly active. It requires a monumental effort of mental vigilance, a refusal to outsource your internal peace to capricious circumstances or the fleeting approval of others. It is realizing that while you cannot control the actions of your peers, the shifting tides of economy, or even the sudden betrayal of trust, you retain absolute ownership over how those things shape your spirit. This doesn't mean cultivating a cold, emotionless mask. A healthy emotional life requires empathy and appropriate outrage at injustice, sadness at loss, and genuine joy upon connection. What Apatheia removes is the irrational and excessive passion. It curbs the desire for outcomes that are fundamentally uncontrollable, because it teaches you to value your own inner integrity more than any circumstantial reward. The paradox here, one of the hardest truths to metabolize, is that by accepting emotional limitation, by telling yourself, I am not going to lose my sense of self over this traffic jam, or my productivity does not equate to my soul's worth, you gain an immense psychic energy. You cease expending your precious life force, fighting against reality's inherent randomness. Instead, you redirect that effort toward the one thing that truly matters, refining your character. Apatheia guides you from simply reacting to events to responding according to your highest, most rational self. It elevates existence from a series of desperate responses into an intentional, considered process of becoming better with each passing day. This is not surrender. It is conscious empowerment. Look around you. Look at the sheer velocity of modern life, the constant accumulation, the dizzying climb towards some imagined peak that forever recedes. We are taught from childhood to desire, to strive, and to acquire more. Our lives become this relentless upward trajectory, a Sisyphean push against an invisible plateau of perfect contentment. But what if the very engine driving our ambition is fundamentally flawed? What if the problem isn't our lack of success, but the inherent premise that success guarantees peace? To understand true freedom, we must first face entropy, the universal law of decay and dispersal. Everything changes. The empire collapses, the leaf falls, the memory fades, and even the most deeply held certainty dissolves into flux. This is not a source for melancholy. It is a profound philosophical gift. It grants us perspective. The masters who walked these dusty roads of contemplation understood this fundamentally better than we do today. They were haunted not by the weight of what they possessed, but by the exquisite, undeniable realization of what they would inevitably lose. This awareness, this gentle confrontation with mortality and impermanence, was their greatest liberator. If everything passes, if nothing remains fixed under the relentless march of time, then clinging to any single state, be it status, physical health, emotional high, or financial security, is not just futile, it is deeply irrational. It is an act of psychological resistance against the natural order of things. The mind that grasps too tightly finds itself continuously struggling against its own reality. We mistake permanence for safety. We build our identities on fragile assumptions. I am valuable because I achieved this job. My happiness depends on maintaining this relationship structure. My peace rests upon keeping this accumulation growing. These are all anchors cast into a current that moves relentlessly onward. And what happens when the tide shifts? The anchor snaps, leaving us adrift in a sudden vacuum of panic. Marcus Aurelius understood that to live in constant anticipation, the dread of future loss or present decay, is to forfeit the only thing truly certain, this very moment. His meditations were not dusty recollections of past glories. They were highly practical survival guides for living within an overwhelmingly transient universe. He urged us to look at life through a different lens entirely. When faced with discomfort, when struck by misfortune, or even confronted by success that breeds arrogance, the mind must immediately perform a mental reversal. It must ask, how will this appear in 20 years? How will my child describe this worry? How fleeting is this particular kind of suffering, subjecting our current emotional dramas to the acid bath of time? They lose their acute, paralyzing sting. This radical detachment from perceived permanence does not lead to apathy. On the contrary, it leads to a deep-seated resilience, a knowing that whatever happens next, I will be fundamentally okay, because my core self is built not on externals, but on immutable internal principles. The philosophy of letting go, therefore, becomes the ultimate form of mental strength. It is accepting the river of existence as it flows, without either trying to dam its current or leaping into its rapids in panic. It is realizing that the energy expended battling against what asterisk should not asterisk change is far greater than the energy required simply to observe what asterisk is asterisk changing. We must internalize this perspective. Success does not equal durable happiness, and suffering will pass. The goal is not to accumulate achievements, but rather to accustom ourselves to the rhythm of flux itself, to greet loss with equanimity, and to accept gain with humility, knowing that both are merely temporary arrangements of matter and feeling. The greatest act of sovereignty, then, is accepting impermanence. It means acknowledging that our identity is not fixed in any single triumph or tragedy. It resides instead in the consistent choice to greet reality in all its chaotic, beautiful, fleeting splendor with an open hand, ready to adapt, and with a heart capable of remembering that tomorrow everything will look different, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will remain quite the same. To be free is simply to be prepared for change, utterly and completely. We have spent these chapters discussing grand concepts, the boundary between what we control and what remains capriciously outside of it. We have talked about shedding desire like a discarded skin, recognizing that our yearning for more is often just an elegant, well-marketed form of internal distraction. But philosophy, especially in the modern age, often feels too abstract, too much like dusty scrolls in an impenetrable library. It sounds intellectual, but how does it actually rewire the nervous system? How do we move this wisdom from theory into the gritty reality of a Tuesday afternoon when a perceived slight triggers a disproportionate rage? The core struggle here is one that transcends mere external events. It isn't traffic, or a disappointing quarterly report, or even the unexpected cold shoulder from an acquaintance. The true battlefield is occurring within the delicate geography of our own minds. It resides in judgment. Our inability to stop at simply observing an event, to recognizing it merely as existing, is the fundamental failure of modern consciousness. The Stoics, and indeed every truly reflective human being who has ever sought self-mastery, identified this single point of vulnerability: the assent we give to our internal narratives. We are not victims of circumstance. Rather, we are chief architects of our own emotional suffering. The external world is utterly neutral. It simply happens. A dog barks, a colleague ignores an email, the market dips. These events possess no inherent moral weight. They carry only data. But when we process that data through the filter of expectation and fear, it instantly acquires catastrophic significance. This jump from raw event to emotionally loaded catastrophe is where suffering originates. And this brings us to the inner critic. It is a deeply insidious companion. It speaks in the language of certainty, using definitive pronouncements like, "You should have known better. You are always late. That was unforgivable. It never works out." This voice masquerades as wisdom and caution, but its true function is merely to generate narrative tension, keeping us perpetually agitated and seeking external justification for our internal turmoil. The The Stoic Logician approaches this critic not with angry rebuttal, but with rigorous questioning. It does not argue emotionally against the accusation. It dismantles the flawed premises of the statement itself. When the critic asserts that a failure proves your inadequacy, the logician asks, what definition of inadequate are we using? And who wrote the rulebook for that definition? The process is one of profound psychological suspension. Whenever you feel that hot surge of immediate, unjust indignation, that flash moment where something triggers an absolute emotional reaction, you must institute a deliberate pause. This is not merely mindfulness. It is cognitive intervention. It is forcing a temporary circuit break between the stimulus and your response. The goal here is to redefine judgment itself. A judgment is not simply an opinion, which can be changed with a counterargument. No, a true Stoic judgment is the asterisk asterisk, the immediate and unchallenged agreement you give to a premise about reality. You are agreeing that this insult defines your worth. You are assenting that this setback signals ultimate doom. By pausing, by refusing to offer that initial assent, you starve the negative narrative of its fuel. This requires developing a skeptical distance from one's own immediate emotional data stream. We must train ourselves to view strong feelings, the spiraling worry, the flash anger, the crushing despair, not as evidence of an objective truth, but merely as neurological signals, complex chemical processes running their course. They are not commands, they are symptoms. Observing them allows us to separate who we are from how we feel in that precise moment. It is a continuous act of intellectual self-defense. Every time you encounter the urge to immediately blame, exaggerate, or catastrophize an external event, you must mentally intervene and say, wait, let me examine this claim. Is there evidence for this conclusion, stripped bare of my personal dread? Does this judgment add any objective value that I was not already capable of operating with? The Stoic logician recognizes the seductive power of cognitive shortcuts, the emotional leaps we take when tired, stressed, or panicked. These shortcuts are convenient, but they are fundamentally untrue because truth requires effort. It demands the laborious unpacking of assumptions that feel effortless to ignore. Mastering judgment is thus not about being cold. It is about cultivating an exquisite form of mental discernment. It is realizing that while emotions like anger and grief might be perfectly natural human responses, and we should allow ourselves to feel them, we must sever the automatic chain that links feeling directly to action or self-definition. We are allowed to feel rage, for instance, but we must not assent to the judgment that this rage necessitates public confrontation or destructive behavior. The liberation is profound. By questioning the veracity of your own deepest beliefs and the emotional conclusions drawn from minor irritations, you become unbound from them. The world continues its relentless motion, full of disappointments and trivial indignities. But now, within your chosen domain, the unassailable fortress of your rational assent, you have found a quiet sovereignty that no external force can breach. This mastery over internal definition is the single most radical and enduring form of freedom available to any human being. The work never ends. The inner critic will always whisper its corrosive little truths. The anxiety machine will perpetually rev up its engines, and disappointment will invariably rain down like expected gravity. But now you possess the key, the intellectual mechanism to pause, observe the machinery running in your own head, and politely deny it permission to define you. We have often misunderstood the state of detachment. We mistake it for weakness, or worse, for a kind of emotional anesthetic, a retreat into cold indifference that requires us to cease caring entirely. But if we view true Stoic mastery through this lens, we fundamentally misunderstand what apatheia truly is. It is not passivity. It is the rigorous cultivation of internal clarity. It is not giving up, but gaining something far more valuable, decisiveness rooted in wisdom. The ancient mind recoiled from the notion that inner calm meant standing by idly while chaos raged around you. They understood that emotional numbness, the kind fueled by fear or desperation, is simply another form of bondage, a reaction dictated not by reason, but by overwhelming feeling. The hallmark of a truly sovereign spirit is the ability to act. It is action that must emerge from a disciplined self-possession, not from the frantic scramble of an overstimulated ego. Consider the myth of inaction. We fear indifference because we equate it with irrelevance. We believe that if we do not care about the outcome, if we truly achieve that reasoned detachment we have been cultivating, then perhaps nothing matters enough to justify a struggle. This is where modern culture, which rewards perpetual hustle and dramatic emotional investment, will accuse us of failure. But this is the deepest misreading of the philosophy. Our indifference must be directed at outcomes, not actions themselves. We cultivate an indifference toward what falls outside our sphere, the approval of others, the market fluctuations, the capriciousness of fortune, or even the success of a plan itself. This detachment cleanses the wellspring from which we draw our energy, allowing us to commit to something solely because it aligns with virtue and duty rather than for the desperate promise of reward. The true paradox lies here. Profound inner calm is not a velvet curtain shielding you from life. It is, in fact, the most potent armor for engagement. When you have stripped away your dependencies on external validation, when you no longer need the compliment, the promotion, or the public recognition to confirm your self-worth, you cease performing. You become simply present. And that presence, unburdened by ego and desperation, is an incredibly radical form of power. Think of the small moments of life that demand courage. It is not always a heroic, visible gesture. Sometimes it is the quieter refusal, refusing to participate in gossip because you know it weakens your character, refusing to yield to petty drama, even when every instinct screams for the easy camaraderie of surrender, or making the difficult moral choice when expediency suggests silence. These are acts of profound courage because they do not rely on external pressure or immediate benefit. The world perpetually tells us that status dictates action, and desire fuels effort. It implies a transaction. If I can only achieve X, then I will feel Y. Stoicism offers a terrifyingly simple alternative. The goal is not to achieve anything, but simply to act correctly right now. Your most decisive actions are those taken when you have already mentally accepted that the result of your best efforts might be insufficient or even quite poor. This is what defines true courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. We feel fear constantly. It is a basic function of survival, but the disciplined agreement to move forward despite it. It is the willingness to act because something demands moral attention, even when that action carries no guarantee of success or happiness. The action becomes its own reward, predicated solely on the virtue of the effort itself. Furthermore, by mastering this inner indifference, we learn how to discern between genuine responsibility and sheer obligation, the kind fueled by fear of failure or fear of disappointing others. When your sense of duty comes from an internal place of reasoned conviction, a belief that this action is good in itself it carries a weight unlike any desperation. It is clean, it is potent, it is inexhaustible. The disciplined logician has trained themselves to see the world not as a sequence of threat-response mechanisms, but as a stream of material facts against which they must apply reason. This shift changes everything about how they engage with others and with life itself. They are no longer reactionary participants in the circus of modern expectation. They become mindful observers who occasionally, but decisively, step into the ring when their own ethical compass demands it. The myth we dismantle here is that action requires desperation. On the contrary, the quiet confidence drawn from indifference fuels a sustainable and lasting kind of strength. It allows you to engage in the greatest challenges life presents without sacrificing your core self to the whims of circumstance or reputation. It gives you freedom, the ultimate sovereignty, to be engaged wholly, responsibly, and powerfully, yet fundamentally unconcerned with whether that engagement pays off in happiness or recognition. To act only because it is right, regardless of the cost or reward, that is the highest form of human achievement. The art of being indifferently courageous. We have journeyed through the great pillars of Stoic thought, the architecture of the internal citadel, the discipline of judging only what is within our command, and the subtle art of non-attachment. We have learned to distinguish between the raw force of an event and the narrative we impose upon it. But knowledge, even profound wisdom, remains mere potential until it is enacted. A philosophy of the mind is not a theory. It is a muscle that must be trained. It requires ritual, consistency, and above all, disciplined practice. The ancients understood this intimately. They did not believe peace was discovered in a sudden revelation, but rather cultivated through the grueling, gentle discipline of daily habit. This final phase of self-mastery begins at dawn. Before the world has found its voice, before the barrage of notifications, the demands of expectation, or the relentless internal dialogue kicks into gear, we must anchor ourselves. The morning routine is not simply about caffeine and a quick scroll. It is a sacred moment of preemptive mental defense. We treat this time as an intellectual warm-up, preparing the mind to resist the inevitable currents of panic and desire that await us. One foundational practice recommended by the Stoics is what we call the morning review. It requires deliberately setting aside 5 or 10 minutes to anticipate trouble. This might sound counterintuitive. Why meditate on failure? Because the goal is not gloom, but preparation. It is an act of mental triage. We ask ourselves, where do I expect friction today? What conversations are likely to be difficult? Which tasks feel overwhelming? By calling these potential points of stress into the light before they erupt, we strip them of their surprise power. We move from a position of reactive shock to one of proactive expectation. When something unwanted happens later in the day, a delay, a slight, an unexpected bill, we can whisper to ourselves, I was ready for this. This simple act fundamentally rewrites our physiological response. It turns an unexpected crisis into merely predictable discomfort. The second essential ritual is negative visualization, or premeditatio malorum. Again, this sounds dramatic, but its power lies in its radical pragmatism. We are not meant to despair at the possibility of loss, to imagine poverty, illness, or failure as final realities. Rather, we engage in a disciplined intellectual exercise, imagining these losses asterisk in order asterisk, so that when they confront us, they do not catch us unprepared. If we mentally walk through the steps of losing something important, a job, a relationship, health, we find 2 powerful consequences. First, we appreciate what we have now with stark clarity. We see the sheer privilege of our present moment and its complexity. Second, when true hardship arrives, it is not a catastrophic void. It is simply an expected challenge that requires problem solving, not existential collapse. We desensitize ourselves to the shock, turning fear into manageable logistics. The emotional weightiest practice, however, remains journaling. Writing is not merely an act of emptying the mind onto paper. It is a structured dialogue with our deepest selves, forcing introspection and accountability. In that journal, we become both student and stern mentor. We record our raw anxieties, the sudden rage at traffic, the deep pang of envy over a colleague's success, the wasteful fear of missing out. And then, critically, we apply the Stoic lens to that recorded emotion. Instead of simply venting or ruminating, ask, is this judgment necessary? Am I treating this external event as an immutable reflection of my worth? We force ourselves into intellectual detachment from our own emotional narratives. By articulating the root assumptions, the belief that success must equal happiness, or that people's opinions define our reality, we begin to dismantle the architecture of self-deception. These rituals are not guarantees of peace. They are merely disciplines that build resilience. They teach us that true strength is not visible in moments of triumph or dramatic heroism, but in the quiet, dogged continuation of being well when we would rather simply cease effort. The daily practice of returning to these foundational habits, the morning review, the acknowledgement of loss, The honest reckoning in writing recalibrates our default setting. It subtly redirects our focus from the uncontrollable noise of external life back into the pristine, unpolluted space of our own ascent. We are not seeking a shield against all hardship. We are building an internal compass that always points us toward reasoned judgment. The goal is to make the mastery of self so habitual, so ingrained, that by the time the day's inevitable chaos arrives, we do not even need to think about it. It simply becomes who we are, anchored, observant, and profoundly, quietly free. Up until this point, we have focused almost exclusively on the self, the fortress of the mind, the quiet corner where judgment resides. It has been a journey inward, disciplined, and profoundly necessary. We learned to draw lines, what belongs to us, and what remains stubbornly outside our sphere of influence. But philosophy, at its deepest core, is never merely solitary work. To build an impenetrable citadel only to remain within it is perhaps the ultimate exercise in self-imprisonment. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures. We thrive on connection. Yet modern life often treats genuine interaction as another exhausting source of potential failure or disappointment. The assumption that inner peace requires radical isolation is a pervasive myth, a dangerous overcorrection for the noise of the outside world. We mistake emotional detachment from others for self-sufficiency. The goal is not to become hermits retreating from society, but rather to redefine what it means to participate in life without being swallowed by its demands or the disappointments of human connection. Consider the nature of interdependence. Every single relationship we cherish, the friendship that sustained you through a difficult year, the familial bond, the partnership built on shared history, is an embrace of profound vulnerability. We hand over parts of our agency to others, trusting their character, their reliability, and their goodwill. This is where the rigorous work of Stoicism meets the messy reality of humanity. The common mistake is to treat other people's actions or feelings as direct threats to our internal stability. We anticipate betrayal, we fear judgment, we calculate every favorable response, because we are implicitly wagering our inner peace on external outcomes governed by unpredictable hearts and shifting circumstances. This perpetual state of emotional guard duty is exhausting, far more taxing than any traffic jam or impending deadline. The mastery we seek, therefore, must be portable. It cannot remain confined solely within the boundaries of our own skulls. It must flow outward, informing how we engage with community. The discipline shifts from merely observing ourselves to actively governing our asterisk response, asterisk, to others. How does self-sovereignty translate into friendship? It means refusing to allow a friend's bad mood or perceived slight to derail the fundamental goodness you see in them, even if they cannot see it themselves. It is maintaining perspective when a loved one's actions make you feel responsible for their emotional well-being, a weight that ultimately belongs only to them. The paradox of connection is this: true depth requires boundaries. Authentic closeness requires self-respect. If we are constantly giving away our peace if we allow the failures, frustrations, or careless words of others to act as primary determinants of our mood or value, we aren't connecting. We are simply facilitating emotional dependency. This realization is intensely empowering because it redirects the locus of control once more. Instead of worrying about whether a friend will call back or if a partner will meet your expectations, you focus solely on whether your own actions in that moment are virtuous and compassionate. Your goal shifts from securing an external positive outcome to simply being the best version of yourself, the clearest reflection of reason available to the situation. The community of self-sovereignty is not built by withdrawal. It is built through thoughtful, resilient engagement. It means cultivating relationships where emotional giving does not equate to self-erasure. It requires learning to communicate needs and limits with clarity and kindness, accepting that setting a boundary might temporarily cause friction, but is necessary for the sustained health of both parties. It asks us to be present without being possessed, to listen deeply without needing to fix, to offer support without attaching ownership of their happiness to your own performance. This measured compassion, this ability to hold space for another person's imperfection while remaining centered in your own stable core, is perhaps the highest and most misunderstood form of wisdom. We transition from the philosophy of personal resilience to the practice of communal excellence. Self-mastery does not exempt us from human messiness. Rather, it equips us with the tools to meet that messiness without dissolving our inner peace. It allows us to participate fully in life's rich complexities, the joy, the frustration, the inevitable loss, while remaining fundamentally undisturbed by the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, whether those arrows are launched by fate or merely by careless human hands. The true liberation found here is not solitude, but companionship tempered by indifference. It is realizing that you can be deeply involved in the life of others without making their well-being a mandatory prerequisite for your own tranquility. It is a profound act of grace toward yourself and to every person you encounter, understanding that ultimate sovereignty resides only within the thoughtful, unwavering jurisdiction of your own mind. The years are long, and the momentum of modern life is merciless. We were introduced to anxiety as an enemy, a relentless drumbeat of what-ifs, convincing us that worry was in fact the necessary precursor to success. And we, having internalized this lie, have spent our lives running from one future imagined worst-case scenario to another, breathless and utterly exhausted. But mastery, true mastery, is not about outrunning fear. It is about recognizing where the finish line actually lies. The journey back began by learning boundaries. We learned that the self is an internal citadel, a small, fiercely protected domain of judgment, a place impervious to traffic jams or fluctuating stock markets. The echoes of Epictetus guide us. What happens outside this boundary does not define you. Only your ascent, your internal response to the chaos, holds power. We then faced the architecture of desire itself. We were confronted with the endless dopamine loop, the shimmering promise that fulfillment lay one purchase, or one promotion, or one deeper commitment away. This siren's song whispers that more is salvation. Yet, as we delved into Stoicism, we saw that chasing external validation or trying to fill internal voids with material gains is merely trading momentary distraction for permanent dissatisfaction. The liberating realization was this: the true measure of sovereignty comes not from accumulation, but from recognizing sufficiency. And so, we arrived at Apatheia. It remains misunderstood, a profound word often mistaken by a culture obsessed with feeling everything intensely for years. To believe that detachment means numbness is to misunderstand human wisdom entirely. Apatheia is not emotional vacuum. It is intellectual clarity. It is the supreme capacity to observe the storm without being swept away by its spray. It is the difference between reacting blindly in the heat of the moment and pausing to ask, is this event truly bad, or is my interpretation of this event what makes it so? This pause is where all power rests. The understanding that everything changes provided the necessary perspective. We studied Marcus Aurelius, who taught us the exquisite burden and ultimate freedom found in acknowledging impermanence. Nothing lasts, no achievement, no source of pain, no relationship, not even the feeling of intense anxiety, is immune to time's patient erosion. To cling desperately to permanence is an act of self-deception. It blinds us to the present rhythm of flux. True resilience, therefore, was not built by securing things against change, but by realizing that accepting the inevitable passing only frees us to appreciate what already is. These layers of philosophy, the citadel, the discipline of ascent, the wisdom of impermanence, were meant not for theoretical contemplation alone. They required practice. We were taught techniques like negative visualization, preemptively greeting loss so that its shock value loses its teeth, and the daily review, where we anticipate stress so that when it arrives, it appears merely as a forecast rather than an unexpected calamity. These practices refined action itself. We dismantled the myth that non-attachment means passivity. Quite the contrary. True Stoic courage is not throwing one's body in front of a metaphorical danger. It is making decisive choices, principled actions, from a place of absolute inner stillness, unaffected by the praise or fear of others. It is sovereignty in motion. And finally, we moved from self-focus to relationship. We wrestled with the modern narrative that suggests peace must be found through total withdrawal, an impermeable shell guarding against the messy vulnerability of human connection. Stoicism offers a counterpoint. True freedom does not necessitate isolation. Instead, it allows us to participate in community, to love, to work, to disagree with measured detachment. We learn how to set boundaries that are firm enough to protect the inner citadel, yet permeable enough to allow authentic connection. The culminating realization is simplicity itself. Look back at the initial montage of chaos we witnessed, the flashing lights, the urgent emails, the unending scroll. If you watch it now, not through the lens of anxiety, but through the accumulated wisdom of these disciplines, something shifts. The frenzy does not disappear, but your relationship to it fundamentally changes. You are no longer a passenger swept along by external demands. You become an anchor. The goal is not some dramatic, triumphant moment where all the noise suddenly ceases. It is the slow, quiet realization that peace is not a destination awaiting arrival. It is simply the default setting of a mind that has finally learned to reside at its center. To be enough means realizing you do not need the world to stop spinning for you to feel grounded. It means finding your stillness within the relentless flow, recognizing that the most radical and powerful